self-compassion, it's kind of like this superpower, you know? It's like when you're a friend to yourself, everywhere you go, you have this supportive inner voices. You know, you believe in yourself, you kind of accept yourself, even though you aren't perfect, you encourage yourself to change. You're kind to yourself, you're understanding of your limitations, although you might also be a little tough and like, hey, you really need to work on that one. You know, all of that is such a useful resource when we're going through life. And it seems to start young, which is great.
This is less of a question, more of a comment as you've been talking about this. My first thought is when I was growing up as a teen, I didn't see teens, or I didn't have an experience of being introspective very much, I'd have to say. And it seems that I see a lot more teens that are open to looking at self-compassion for themselves and being open to look at themselves and to work on themselves. And I don't know if that's changed or if I just had a different experience.
Or are you a guy and maybe is it a male-female difference? What's your thought?
Yeah, well, definitely. So, well, it's interesting. Who would you guess is more self-compassionate, men or women?
Oh my gosh. I don't know, because I have two daughters. And so I'm like, I would usually say, if I didn't have two daughters, I'd say, well, probably a woman, but I know my daughters and I hear my daughters. And so I would actually probably say a guy, a teen.
Yeah, actually, so that's true. So it's not a huge difference, but it is consistent, and it seems to start around adolescence. Because women or girls are more self-critical than boys are. And I think there's also something about, you know, gender roles kind of giving more entitlement to males. And so the sense of meeting your own needs is kind of more acceptable. Whereas with a girl, you're socialized to always meet other people's needs first. And there's a lot of self-criticism based on, you know, am I good enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I smart enough? So girls actually have slightly lower levels of self-compassion than guys do. The interesting thing, though, is even though this is the case, girls are much more open to the idea of self-compassion than boys or men are. Because for boys and men, it kind of goes against gender roles, right? So the gender role of being nurturing and kind is more acceptable for girls and women, even though they're typically giving that kindness to other people. But so in some ways, it's easier to just turn that around for oneself if you aren't socialized to believe like that's for sissies or that's weak or something like that. So it's quite interesting the way gender plays a role here. Yeah.
I could see that. The other thing, again, like a comment more than a question, maybe you can come up with a good question out of this, is that I've been hearing a lot about mental health for kids, teens, and as they're going into college. And I hear colleges struggling with, you know, being able to support the mental health, having enough mental health professionals to support the needs in the college. And then it's been going up and up in the high schools and in the colleges. So I'm especially excited to hear about this kind of work because, like you said, it's like a superpower in that it could decrease the difficulties that some kids are experiencing. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, no, absolutely, right. And so depression is a huge issue. And by the way, depression is twice as common among girls than boys, you know, and there's a lot of reasons. There may be a slight biological reason, but I think a lot of the reasons are girls tend to be more self-critical. And also in some ways you might say there's more pressure on girls than there are on boys for a variety of reasons. And so self-compassion is really good for decreasing depression. There's also studies showing that it decreases suicidal ideation, you know, thoughts of suicide, which is also a huge problem. It helps, for instance, when kids go off to college, they're less homesick. So this ability, and you know, the thing is, we've talked about this before, but it's different than self-esteem, because self-esteem is, I like myself, you know, I'm a good person, I'm attractive, I'm successful, people like me, I'm good at this, I'm good at sports, I'm good at music, whatever it is I care about. But then what happens when someone rejects you, you know, or then what happens when you don't do as well as you think? It's like kind of a fair weather friend, and the self-esteem is often unstable, right? Especially in the early years when you don't have a lot to base it on. And so self-compassion is not about getting it right, quite the opposite. It's when you get it wrong, can you be kind and understanding toward yourself? Can you support yourself? Can you be caring to yourself in your imperfection, right? As opposed to just valuing yourself because you want to be perfect. And for that reason, it's a much more stable resource for teens and for adults than self-esteem is. And so that's why I think there's a lot of success with it. And so like I said, well, I've developed with a colleague, Chris Germer, something called the Mindful Self-Compassion Program, which is designed for adults. But some of the people that teach the program developed a teen version called Making Friends with Yourself, right? And yeah, mostly girls come to this program. I mean, boys are just a little less interested, I'm sure, because of gender roles. But nonetheless, the good news is we find that the girls love it. They completely get it. You know, it's like, makes complete sense to them, which is really good news. Once you explain, well, don't you want to be a good friend to yourself? I mean, like when you ask them, would you really say that to someone you cared about? And they say, no, God, of course I wouldn't. Well, then what do you think's the impact if you say it to yourself? It's like, oh yeah, you're right. You know, it's not rocket science. It's a great thing. And so there's a lot of openness to it.